Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. It's election season, so of course everyone's talking about those polls, but we wanted to go a little bit deeper today.
Yeah.
And, you all reached out and asked us to really unpack some recent public opinion data on Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
So that's what we're going to do.
We're at that point right now where, like, early October 2024, every single word, every event is just like magnified times 1,000,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this CNN article you sent, it goes way beyond just, who's up, who's down in the polls. It's really about the why.
Exactly. And what are people actually absorbing about these candidates? What's sticking in their minds? We're talking perceptions here. And honestly, sometimes perception is even more powerful than facts in an election.
Sadly, that is true. And, speaking of things that stick, one word that keeps popping up in this data that I think is worth unpacking is lie. Yeah. This isn't everyone saying it. Yeah. But the fact that it's trending upwards for both Harris and Trump, especially post-debate, I think is really noteworthy.
Okay.
It makes you kind of wonder, is this just about them? Or is there like a broader distrust brewing this election cycle?
That's a really interesting point, and it's not just the word itself, right? The article gave an example of somebody saying that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Harris's words are just a jumble, and that her promise to secure the border is a flat-out lie to get elected.
Ouch.
Ouch. Yeah, that stinks.
Yeah.
And it shows how easily a soundbite, even if it's taken out of context, can become someone's reality. And, it's like we really need to be critical thinkers these days, especially with social media and everything just acting as such an echo chamber.
Totally. And before we get too doom and gloom on Harris, the data does show a little glimmer of hope here.
Okay.
It seems like people are finally starting to associate her with specific policy areas, mainly immigration and the economy.
This is actually a big deal.
Because for the first time in this polling project, we're seeing multiple policy topics crack the top 5 when it comes to Harris.
Wow.
Which suggests that maybe, just maybe, her campaign's laser focus on these issues is breaking through.
Right, and it's not all negativity. The article even quoted someone saying they were impressed by, quote, her concern for all, ability to concretely point to solutions. So people are seeing that side of her too.
That's the thing about perceptions, right? They're complex and multifaceted, and often they're as much a reflection of the perceiver as they are of the person being perceived. Now, while Harris seems to be trying to own those specific policy areas, Trump's campaign seems to be taking a bit of a different approach.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because the data actually points to Trump's campaign being shaped by different events altogether.
Right.
For one, those assassination attempts are still front and center in people's minds.
Yeah.
Which is honestly pretty unsettling.
Absolutely. I mean, those were traumatic events, and it's understandable that they would linger in the public consciousness. I think it's really striking, though, is that alongside those attempts, his meeting with Zelensky also seems to have made a real mark.
Okay.
It's almost like people are hyper-aware of any foreign policy moves he makes in this kind of climate.
And you would think that, immigration would be a bigger deal in relation to Trump, just given his history with the issue.
Right.
But the data suggests it's taken a back seat, at least for now.
Yeah, it's true. Instead, we're seeing things like, and I quote from the article, he met with Zelensky and was not very enthusiastic about helping Ukraine.
Wow.
Neutral on the surface, but definitely the kind of comment that gets people thinking, debating.
And probably drawing their own conclusions, which goes back to those perceptions we were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got lie popping up for Trump, just like we did with Harris there. But here's where the comparison gets really interesting. The overall sentiment towards Trump has actually gotten a bit less negative since that debate.
Interesting. Well, you'd think that word lie would drag down anyone's ratings, right?
Right.
But you have to remember, public opinion is a fickle beast.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that while some voters still have doubts about his honesty, I mean, the word's right there in the data, they may be responding to something else entirely.
Okay.
Maybe it's other aspects of his campaign, or even just a reaction to Harris's increasingly negative perception.
So it's not just about how people see you, it's about how they see you compared to the other guy.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
Now throw this into the mix. Public attention on both candidates is actually lower than at this point in previous elections. It's almost like everyone's holding their breath.
You know what? You're right. It does feel a little bit quieter this time around. A little less frantic, maybe. What do you make of that as an expert on, well, everything?
I wouldn't say everything, but in this case, it could be a few things.
Okay.
Maybe it's the debate timing.
Right.
We still have a few weeks to go, so, things might heat up a little closer to November, or maybe just makes election fatigue.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been on this roller coaster for years, and people need a breather.
Totally understandable if that's the case. It's a lot to process, especially with so much at stake. But, I mean, that's why we're here, right?
Right.
To help make sense of it all. So big picture time, what insights can we actually glean from this data as we hurtle towards November?
Well, one thing we keep bumping into is how much power perception really holds. It's
Yeah.
like those words, those events that stick in people's minds, they have weight even if they don't tell the whole story.
Absolutely. And I think it highlights why these deep dives are so important. You've all trusted us with your time to kind of cut through the noise and try to make sense of it all. And it's not just about knowing the candidates' positions or even their policies, but it's understanding how those things are landing, how they're being perceived, and frankly, how easily those perceptions can be manipulated.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into what this all means for the election.
Right.
It's anyone's game at this point, but
Yeah.
like, what stands out to you as we're heading into these final weeks? Honestly, this feels like it's going to be one for the history books. I think it's going to be close. It's going to be unpredictable. The data we have doesn't really show either candidate with like a real lock on the public imagination just yet. So I think it's going to come down to who can truly connect, who can really address those anxieties that I think a lot of voters are feeling, and who can articulate a vision for the future that really resonates with people.
And maybe, just maybe, who can shift those perceptions in their favor?
Exactly. Because as we've seen, perception is incredibly powerful in an election.
Well, we've explored what people are hearing about Harris and Trump, but, the information itself, like its accuracy, the sources, all the potential biases, that's really something for you listening to be mindful of as we enter these final crucial
Yeah.
weeks.
Yeah, consider this your friendly reminder to stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, get out there and vote.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Until next time, happy deep diving.